Hello, all. Welcome to APUSH Unit 7, Part 2 of Unit 7, covering the Roaring Twenties, the Great Depression, and the New Deal. Let's just get right into it and start off with the Roaring Twenties. So, the Roaring Twenties are called the Roaring Twenties because this was a time of partying. This was a time of good feelings, of fulfillment and success. Because we just won, we won World War I, and we're also prospering economically. And what are the some of the reasons that we are prospering economically? The first one I want to start off with is welfare capitalism, where we're fighting poverty and unemployment through increasing wages, adjusting hours, and some social programs are afoot um that are working right now to help aid the lower class and the working class in general. And also in terms of helping the working class, efforts are being made to kind of reduce the frequency of fighting between labor unions and factory owners and corporations, because any strike that occurs due to a labor union's actions often result in impediments on production of products, which would thus impede on a profit in a corporation or factory, and thus like that hurts the economy, even if it's like super duper small. That isn't as optimal for making as much money as possible. So reducing the frequency of fights between labor unions and factory owners does a lot more than you think, and that helps the economy a lot more than you think. Second reason, well, the second point that I bring up is war debts and margin spending. First thing about war debts is that America, after joining the war, was a significant help to Britain and France, who had been taking a real beating for the past couple of years in World War One. Because remember, World War One started in 1914, and America joined World War One in 1917, and the war ended in 1918. So let's just use our logic here. We started off really late, and we fought the good fight, and we helped out a lot of our allies. So what that means here is that they're indebted to us and that we didn't really take a lot of damage compared to Britain and France. So they have to pay us back, and we retain a lot of funds. We didn't lose as much as, say, in the War of 1812 because of a war. We still have a lot of. The point is that we still have a solid amount of money that we didn't lose in the war, and Britain and France owe us money. And another thing is that there is kind of this circulation of debt going on within, well, the globe, because Germany lost the war and they have to pay war reparations as stated by the Treaty of Versailles. They are getting beaten down, and they have to pay back Britain and France for the damages that they caused. And they do that, and then Britain and France thus have to give us money because they are indebted to us from our help in the war. But yeah, that's war debts. We're getting a lot of money from different nations around the world. Margin spending was sort of like, in a way, kind of like credit, where you're getting more buying power. You're able to quote unquote take money from a broker that you would invest into the stock market, and then you would sell your stock, and then you would make big money. So it's just increasing the buying power of um those who participate in the stock market. And margin spending is going to be very important later in the video for the Great Depression, because if you know the Great Depression, the whole reason it started is because of the inherent issue with margin spending and how that affected the banks, which caused the stock market collapse and the bank collapse. But that's further in like 10 minutes, maybe even less. But let's move forward. And the third reason, increased productivity in scientific management. We've talked about this before in the Unit 6 video. This is just a continuation of that from the Industrial Revolution. The same practices are in place, and not only have they been continued, but they've also been refined, thus promoting economic prosperity. Oh, wait, I forgot about thus promoting economic prosperity. And now let's move forward into why the Roaring Twenties were seen as this such like a fulfilling time period. That's also because of that is because of a rising consumer culture where people were spending more money to find fulfillment within themselves. And where else to look at that but at the theater, at the movies? Movie theaters were popping up, and they became a very frequent pastime for many Americans to go see a movie with their family and enjoy their time. So increases in leisure time. We also have advertisements. Advertisements again started popping up. You're gonna see these vintage advertisements that promoted many different products. Here I just got um a Coke product and a candy product because I'm hungry and I'm thirsty. But yeah, just and look, they even show the price for most of these. And as you can see, it's pretty cheap, even by 1920 standards. It's relatively cheap. So the the promotions that these advertisements are giving off are thus promoting their product, and advertisements more often than not do work, obviously. So yeah, that's one reason why consumer culture was also on the rise, and this was just another aspect of the Roaring Twenties that is going to probably be on your APUSH quiz that Mr. will give you every Friday. And innovations in travel, we talked about Ford's assembly line here, and we talked about that in the Unit 6 video. It was primarily used during this time period in the 1920s, and yeah, it just rapidly increased the production of cars, and give it a couple more decades and cars will become one of the most like common forms of transportation. But this is pretty much where mass production of cars begins. And we also have innovations in aviation, where during this time period we saw planes really take off, no pun intended, but their development was rapid, and you can see they were in the air during this time period. Helping farmers. So an issue that we discussed in the Unit 6 video was that of populism and the Populist Party, farmers fighting industrialization. And the solution to these protests from farmers about, hey, how am I going to make a living, was parity. Parity pretty much guaranteed a profit for all farmers and their crops. So a farmer would sell crops, and even if they didn't sell their crop to a single person, they would still make a profit, thus still allowing them to have more buying power in society that they could spend to, again, just continue their production and their business. So yeah, that's how the issue from the Unit 6 video was resolved, and that's how there really was no more outrage and outcry from farmers from here. So now I want to draw your attention to a photo of these women from the 1870s. They are in their puffy dress. I'm not going to try and describe this, but you see with that image, with this new image of women in the 1920s, it is a massive far cry from what we see here. It's a 50-ish year difference, and it's completely new and radical. That's because of the emergence of flappers, a stereotype for women in the 1920s. Because even in their setting, you can tell that the women of the 1870s are in a much different environment than those in the 1920s. And flappers were this depiction of women that they were more confident, and here we can even just see that women have kind of escaped their sphere of domesticity, and they've begun dressing more in the way that they would prefer, and they are wow, sorry, like I said, the 1920s were a time of partying, and women often went out to club, they went out to party, and this is highlighting this new sense of individuality among women. So yeah, again, just progression in status of women over history. Boom. Speaking of progression, we also have the Harlem Renaissance. Harlem Renaissance occurred because of the Great Migration in the 1920s. Not the 1920s, during World War One, right before the 1920s, and in the 1920s is when the Harlem Renaissance occurred, and this saw the vitalization of jazz music and literature on racial pride. Think Langston Hughes. If you had Mr. Brower's class in ninth grade, think A Raisin in the Sun. I believe that was published around the time period of the Harlem Renaissance. But with the rising status and a spotlight kind of being put on African Americans because of the Harlem Renaissance, we see the reprise of the KKK to combat this progression for African Americans. Oh, Mr. O'Brien's class, and maybe Mr. Mishra's class, I don't know, but I vividly remember O'Brien talking about the Scopes monkey trial, religion versus science, where Professor Scopes states that humans evolved from monkeys, and he based his whole argument on the theory of evolution, and this was just so bizarre for the time because religion had primarily been on the forefront and an explanation for a lot of different things in society at the time, and any challenges to that norm, like it was met with opposition, and that was the Scopes trial. Yeah. Not as important as you might think, but here we are. The Great Depression, the highlight of this video. How did it happen? So there are a couple reasons why the Great Depression happened. First one, consumer culture and margin spending. So consumer culture, we discussed really just people are spending lots of money on indulgences and indulging themselves and having a fun time. So that was already a a significant use of people's buying power, and also margin spending. Like I said, margin spending was the cause for the stock market crash, because it whenever like something went down like in the stock market, then the banks would be the ones to suffer after the stock was sold. So yeah, those two significantly impacted um the economic setting of America on a more local level among the people. Failure of the world market and high tariffs. So um high tariffs generally were put in place just to kind of juice out more money, and high tariffs were also just put in place because the world market was falling apart. Britain and France and Germany were all dirt poor from the war, so they were struggling to pay back their war debts, so world market was failing there, and they enacted high tariffs, which was again draining the US, so that also hurt us, and eventually we just have a global Great Depression that is just no good for anyone. Excessive overproduction and high parity. So we just discussed parity. Parity was too high, and too much funds were allocated toward it, and that is an issue on a, like that's a self-explanatory issue. And excessive overproduction of agricultural crops was another issue in the agricultural setting. And again, just like making sure that farmers make a profit off of all their crops when we have such excessive overproduction, that is definitely going to hurt federal funds. And the final thing is uneven income distribution. Although we did have welfare capitalism, it's not like it's going to succeed for everybody. And even then, we still live in the industrial society where corporations are on top. These factory workers, not factory workers, these factory owners are on top of factory workers, are kind of perpetually in the same state. So rich get richer and poor stay in the same place and or get poor. But moving forward, Black Thursday is the day that, aka the stock market crashes, and in order to kind of quell the panic even for a short amount of time, a bank holiday is issued where all the banks are put on hold for a couple of days. And here in this article, you can even see that Congress is called to meet to discuss the issue and how they're going to move forward from here. This is our current president at the time, Herbert Hoover, aka a lame duck president, which we will get into soon. But Herbert Hoover, he's the president in charge to figure out how are we going to solve this massive like punch to our economy. And his solution is to raise taxes and to keep the government laissez-faire, keep the government out of the economy, even when the economy is pretty much eating itself alive. Like the economy is crumbling, and he decides not to intervene and instead to raise taxes, but also to raise tariffs with the Harley-Smoot Act. And this wasn't really the best option, as we see with the development of Hoovervilles. Hoovervilles were these makeshift shanty towns, pretty much. Like people were living they were living in these, like that looks like something you would find in a slum. And these were called Hoovervilles because a lot of people blamed Herbert Hoover for the conditions for income that workers had. Like workers couldn't afford proper housing, so they had to literally build these like poor like shanty houses in the middle of a field and live there. So yeah, Herbert Hoover didn't really have the best time after a bit, and FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, was elected shortly after the development of Hoovervilles. And Hoover is called a lame duck president because he tried to salvage his campaign. He tried to get reelected. He tried to promise that everything would be better, but it didn't really matter because FDR was going to come in. He would bring something new, and he was going to bring a new deal. Hey, no pun intended. That was coincidental. But FDR's New Deal focused on three things, three R's: relief, recovery, and reform. How can we relieve the American citizens? How can we recover the economy? And how can we reform the economy so that something like this never happens again? And so his New Deal issued out a whole bunch of programs and a handful of acts. And it comes in two phases. The first phase being where a lot of the stuff happens is very bloated. And it's pretty much just a large issuing of programs that really just focus on relief and recovery rather than reform for now. And let's just go through these programs really fast. I listed a lot because it's very important that you know at least 4 of these for an outside evidence on a DBQ or LBQ. So, Works Progress Administration, it created jobs for Americans. Agricultural Adjustment Act, that should be over here. Limits agricultural production, because remember, overproduction was a problem, and in turn, that also kind of solves the parity issue, because um, less stuff, less money to give for less crops means generally better profit compared to before the AA. Civilian Conservation Corp, jobs for young Americans. Tennessee Valley Authority, building dams for energy plants. And National Recovery Administration, promoted cooperation between labor and business. So again, kind of just following up with welfare capitalism, this is kind of just trying to resolve issues between factories and factory workers to avoid conflict, because conflict is the last thing you need right now when what you need is to stimulate the economy. Kind of the way I think about it, the New Deal is kind of like CPR. It's pumping, 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 pumping. It's like CPR, and the fact that it's just pumping out these new programs to help revive the economy. Moving forward, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, FDIC, individual bank deposits to kind of solve some issues with banks that occurred, to make sure that stock market like a stock market crash and running out of funds doesn't occur again. And the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, strict limits on poor stock practice aim to regulate the stock market. And even here, you can recognize that some of these persist even to today. The FDIC and SEC both still exist. Moving forward to acts, Glass-Steagall Act increased bank regulation and monitored how banks invest money. They want to make sure that banks don't be willy-nilly with the money, so that if something like a severe stock market dip were to occur, then the banks wouldn't be out of money. They wouldn't be screwed. And the final thing for here is the Wagner Act. The Wagner Act guaranteed a worker's right to join a union. So, in the future, this also kind of contributes to the reform. If factory owners decide to kind of be buttheads about conditions and wages, then a worker is guaranteed their right to join a union. They all, like any worker, doesn't have to fear anything when wanting to join a union. Wow, okay, my bad. Okay, phase two of the New Deal, around 1935. This was more so focused on reform and reforming corporations and big companies. Congress of Industrial Organizations. This works similarly to some of the labor unions we discussed in the past in the Unit 6 video, and this rivaled the AFL, the American Federation of Labor. And the Social Security Act, again, something else that persists even into the modern day. Social Security checks for the elderly, federal relief for those in need. Self-explanatory. I'm pretty sure a lot of us know what Social Security is already. Okay, both the Democrats and Republicans had their gripes with the New Deal. The Democrats believed that there was too much power going to the government with FDR's New Deal spending specifically. He was spending a lot of money on these New Deal programs, and there was in question like how like is this something viable to do? Is this something that is worth it? Is it worth spending so much money on these programs for a chance for the economy to recover? And another gripe is that it wasn't radical enough. It wasn't too much of a far cry from laissez-faire capitalism for this to be justified and employed. Republicans, their gripe was the constitutionality of the whole ordeal with FDR's use of government power, as this was, as I've been saying, like like excuse me, sorry, FDR's actions and the role of the government in the economy was much different than it has been in the past, as this is one of the first instances in history where the government has been so hands-on with the economy. Like I said, it's like CPR, and that was put into question if these actions were even constitutional. Moving forward, I just want to show you this cartoon that just pretty much just shows what I was talking about, especially in regards to federal funding, where the New Deal is seen as like a plow, like a steamroller, and here I know it's very blurry, which is my bad, but it literally says where are the where are the brakes on this thing, something like that. Like there is no end to New Deal spendings, and FDR literally says what breaks. Like the spending is excessive, and it is a danger to the stability of the federal government. That's what this cartoon is saying. And like we've just been talking about, there has been opposition to the New Deal from both Democrats and Republicans, but also from the Supreme Court, who who made efforts to like kind of act as a buffer to some New Deal programs. And FDR, he understood the necessity of a lot of these programs toward recovering America, like America as a whole, toward approaching stability. And so FDR did something called court packing. He had his own court packing scandal where what he did is that he took six new Supreme Court justices and he put them into the court and he benched, quote unquote, benched the old ones. So he just removed those court justices that were impeding on his New Deal programs and replaced them. In this cartoon, we see that replacement evident where FDR is making his own declarations, and he just has a whole bunch of yes men for the Supreme Court justices so that they can all agree and allow his New Deal programs to commence. And he like this is also from that perspective that FDR's government power, like his use of government power, is unruly because like this cartoon shows that he's throwing away justice and constitutional values. So to sum it up, he's replacing court justice, like Supreme Court justices, just to benefit and progress his own endeavors, which adds on to our continuity, where we talked about presidents overexerting their power in times of need or in times of war. Like we said in the last video, Alien Sedition Acts times of war, Lincoln times of war, Espionage Acts times of war. Here is the instance where that like the time of need comes in. Like all of these do classify under time of need, but they were more specifically during a war. But this is more specifically during a time of need. FDR attempts to court pack to push forward New Deal programs, and boom shakalaka. In the end, New Deal was effective and it was awesome. It was substantially helping the economy. The CPR did have its efficacy, but it wasn't the New Deal that saved the US economy. There just wasn't enough time to really see if the New Deal in the long run was going to revive the economy and bring forth stability, because not long after the New Deal was enacted, not long after 1935, World War II occurred, and World War II and the need for resources and mass production for the war effort is what revived the economy. That's what brought back stability. This marks the end of part 2 for Unit 7 of APUSH. Next video, we will be wrapping up Unit 7 with all of World War II. I will catch you guys then.